With all the crazy bugs, looming deadlines, and design issues, being a solo indie game developer can often feel like being trapped in a lighthouse in the middle of a storm with a crazy old man trying to kill you. It's enough to make ye go mad. Only exaggerating a little bit. But the point being is that recently I decided to undertake a little challenge for myself. 2 months away from my main game I've been developing to remake one of my older games. Surely making a full game in 2 months won't drive me insane, right? Well, to figure that out, we need to rewind a little bit. Back to the year 2022, where younger me decided that I was going to make a little game. I wanted to participate in a game jam, but being in college full-time made that a little tricky, so I decided to make my own little game on the side. I had recently finished playing through The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening for the Switch, and I really enjoyed its fishing minigame. Super fun, very easy to pick up and understand, and I just feel like it was missing so much. It had a ton of potential, and they just missed out on it. And so that sort of inspired me to take my own shot at replicating this minigame. So after a month of dedicating my free time to this little project, out came Salty Trawler. This was my first ever completed game that I actually published online. And because of that, it's just a little rough around the edges. You cast your line, bring in some fish, and then go to town to buy upgrades. Very simple gameplay loop, but it didn't have to be any more complex. And so after publishing it, I promptly moved on to other projects and forgot about it. Until recently. You see, Steam lets the developers know ahead of time what events are going to be coming up soon, such as the seasonal sales, Steam Next Fest, and even Steam Fishing Fest. Fishing. Wait a minute, I've made a fishing game before. So that's when it hit me. Since I've come a long way as a game developer in the past 3 years, what if I remake Salty Trawler with my new skill set and publish it on Steam? It would be a fun little side project, a nice way to see my growth as a developer, and if I could make the game in under 2 months, I could publish it in time for Steam Fishing Fest. A time-limited game-making challenge? Hey, that's all the convincing I need. Start the timer. I got a game to make. The first week or so I spent building a pretty basic prototype and implementing all of the basic mechanics that needed to be in the game. Casting your hook, catching fish, fish movement, as well as a very basic town system. Development was going swimmingly. Swimmingly. Get it? Because it's a... The next week I focused on getting some art made for the game. Because if there's one thing I love doing, it's procrastinating actually making the game, and instead making art for the game. It wasn't all art this week, though. I did implement a basic upgrade system here where you can choose to upgrade one of 3 different attributes. Depth means how deep your hook will sink in the water before it stops. Casts means how many casts you have while out at sea. And resist was more of a physics thing. I ended up cutting it later on, but I think here it represented how much water resistance there was on the hook. So upgrading it would make your hook flow faster through the water. This was just convoluted. I ended up replacing this with like a speed multiplier. Much easier to understand that way too. Later on, I did also implement a cast power upgrade that allows you to cast your line further away from the boat. Now, something I did want for this game that Salty Trawler didn't have was an actual town that you could like choose to go to different areas of. So on week 3, I spent a good chunk of my time designing how I wanted the town to be laid out. The travel building will let you travel out to sea and go fishing. The store is where you'll buy all of your different upgrades and stuff. And the fish market is where you will actually sell your fish. Now, the butcher shop was going to be a place where you could exchange fish you've caught for certain bait, and the baits would have different effects when you go fishing, but I kind of changed this up a little bit and made it something else. And the question marks there, that ended up being the lighthouse, which we'll get to the lighthouse later. So I took this design and made a pretty basic layout of the town with just the bare necessities. And to close the gameplay loop and make it complete, I also implemented the fish market system. You would sell your fish here, but originally I was going to implement a sort of supply and demand system where certain fish would sell for more or other fish would sell for less. But I quickly realized that this was not going to be within the scope of this small project, so I had to cut that out. I also added in a few new fish here, And I want to bring attention real quick to the way the fishing works in this iteration of the game. If you catch a fish, and your hook gets dragged through a second fish on its way back to the boat, your hook will drop the first fish in exchange for the second fish. Now, this was the way the fishing worked in Salty Trawler as well, and I feel like I may not have to mention this, but this was very frustrating and annoying from a gameplay perspective. Like catching a really big fish and then pulling it up just to get like a little guy caught on the line instead. Super frustrating. So it was around this time that I started asking myself, do I really want to keep that as part of the gameplay? I was thinking about it now because the rest of the game and how I designed it hinges upon this design pillar. In Salty Trawler, I had an upgrade that you could buy that allowed this to just not happen at all, and everyone that played that game said that they rushed that upgrade as soon as possible. So these were the thoughts that were going through my head for the next 2 weeks around this time, and spoiler alert, I did end up removing the weird fishing just because it wasn't fun, and I figured what's better for the game is probably what's going to be more fun. So, okay, rambling done, on to week 4. I had a lot of motivation working on my game this week, so I got a lot done. First, of course, art, but I also added something I wanted to add into Salty Trawler a long time ago, but didn't have the time for. Different fishing spots. So in this version of the game, you can fish in the shallow pools, which has a few basic fish, or you could go to the kelp forest, which has all the good fish and is a bit deeper. I feel like having different fishing spots helps the game's progression go a little smoother. And something I did end up adding later is that it actually costs money to get into some of these later game fishing areas. That way it's more of a risk-reward, like you're risking losing money, but you can make a lot more money by going there. I also made a bunch of new fish for some of these new areas. I made shrimp, because shrimp are cool, and I made these big, giant Goliath groupers, which they stay stationary in the water, but when your hook gets near them, they start following it and trying to eat it. These grouper were also the first of the hazardous fish that I implemented, where you can't just catch them, you need special gear to catch them, otherwise your line will break. The second of these hazard fish that I made were eels that will just pop out of the ground from their burrows and try and bite your hook. Along with a few other fish that I implemented here and there, week 4 was honestly one of my most productive weeks to date. Alright, halfway to the deadline. Everything's going well so far, but I can't help but feel like I've been working on this project forever.
How long have we been on this rock? 5 weeks? 2 days? Where are we? Help me to recollect.
It doesn't matter. All that I need to focus on is completing the project and finishing strong. So, where was I? Week 55. Week 5. This week, I did a lot of UI beautification. Just to, make it look like a marketable game. The shop actually has items in it that you can buy that represent the upgrades, and the travel menu eventually will have a little map that you can actually see the locations that you're traveling to. I made some more art for the underwater shipwreck location, which I think it turned out pretty nice. And I also implemented the Lucky Knot, which is the first of a few consumables that I made for this game. What the Lucky Knot does is when your hook is in the water, you can activate it and cause a little current to make your hook go to the right side of your screen. I figured this would be a good consumable to use because you can always make your hook go to the left by reeling it in, but you can only make it go to the right once, and that's by casting it out. So this consumable gives the player more options in that sense for movement. And to finish out this week, I implemented a rudimentary save system. All it really does is take certain information about the game, such as how much money you've made, the upgrades you've unlocked, etc., and save them to an encrypted binary file on the player's computer. Not too tricky to set up, pretty easy to use, and as an added bonus, I'll be able to use this system in later games down the road. Now, for the last 3 weeks of this little project, I did not record a whole lot of footage because I was locked in on making this game. But I was still working hard and adding tons of stuff to this game. So I'll go through a quick rapid-fire list of stuff I was doing during these last 3 weeks. If there's one thing I've learned from all of my previous games is that playtesting is a must, and I did a ton of it during these last 3 weeks. I won't go into the details, but it was very helpful in getting my game bug-free and polished up for the final product. I added tons of new art, graphics, and UI stuff, including a ship journal, which acts as a fish log, stats menu, pause menu, and settings menu all rolled up into one. I was actually pretty proud of this one because I made all of the little like descriptions and all of the little images and stuff, and I think it turned out really nice. I finally got around to implementing the lighthouse system, which acts as the player progression as well as a very basic story for the game. And what you do here is you feed fish to birds, and in turn the birds will give you gifts. I came up with this idea after watching the movie The Lighthouse, and the whole superstition that seabirds hold the souls of sailors lost at sea is really interesting to me, so I decided to implement that into my game. And I also added in Skipper here, who is the only other character in the entire game aside from the main character. He gives a whole lot of background and lore of the world that you're playing in, but he also acts like a tutorial. He's guiding you towards things that you should do and steering you away from things that you shouldn't be doing. He was pretty easy to make because I kind of just ripped the dialogue system from my other game, Sterling Shroud, and just copy-pasted it onto Skipper, and like it works fine, so always hold on to your old code, guys. You never know when it might come in handy. Nearing the final stretch of the development cycle here, I had finished up most of the mechanical and systems aspects of the game, and so I shifted my focus over to more content side of the game. So I took the time to implement 2 whole new areas complete with new fish and new mechanics even, as well as some new upgrades to go along with them. And in the final few days, I spent them fixing bugs, polishing things up where I could, and getting everything set up on Steam. At long last, after what feels like ages, I finally published the game.
Don't leave me!
So where does that leave us now? Well, first of all, Fish and Chips is out now, and if any of this has looked interesting to you so far, I encourage you to go check out the Steam page and maybe pick the game up for yourself. But I also learned a few things from this. Firstly, I've come a long way since 3 years ago when I first made Salty Trawler, both from a game developer perspective and an artist perspective. I also learned that it's very important to be resourceful when you're developing games like this. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, you can ask for help, that sort of thing. Like I mentioned, I pulled the dialogue system from my old game and put it in this one, but there were also a lot of instances where I wanted to add something specific into the game, so I did a little research, and it turns out Unity had the exact tools that I needed, I just didn't know it. I also learned a lot about UI design on this project. I went through a lot of different menus, a lot of different user interfaces here, and so I feel like I have a better understanding of UI and UX as a whole coming out of this project. Looking back on everything now, though, I really did have a good time with this project, and it was super interesting looking back on my old work and seeing how I can improve it and make it better with my new knowledge and skill set that I have today. And like I mentioned earlier, if any of this has looked fun or interesting to you, then I encourage you to check out Fish and Chips on Steam. Do all the YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, bell icon, sell your soul to the algorithm, etc. And yeah, if you've stuck around this long, thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.